The first time Mitch told me, it wasn't over a dramatic dinner or some big pre-planned "we need to talk." It was on a Wednesday afternoon in late September, the kind of day that smells like pencil shavings and warm asphalt, when our kids' school sends home crumpled flyers in a backpack and the sun hits the kitchen counter like it's trying to make everything look kinder than it is. I was standing at the sink rinsing out a bent-up lunch container when my phone buzzed on the windowsill. Mitch's name lit up the screen. We weren't the kind of exes who called just to chat. Calls meant something. Schedule changes, doctor appointments, a permission slip that needed a signature, a forgotten sweatshirt, a kid-sized crisis. "Hey," I answered, already bracing. "Hey," Mitch said. His voice sounded normal at first, steady, friendly, a little tired. Then there was a pause that was too long to be about soccer practice. Are you alone?" I glanced down the hallway where our kid was sprawled on the rug with markers, humming in that absent-minded way that meant peace. "Yeah," I said, lowering my voice. "What's up?" Another pause. I could hear him breathing. That's what landed first, even before words. The way he had to take a breath like he was about to go underwater. "I need to tell you something," he said. And I don't know how to say it. Mitch was 46, and built like a guy who still believed in doing hard things the hard way, broad-shouldered, careful with his money, careful with his feelings, steady in a way that had once made me feel safe and later made me feel lonely. He was not a man who panicked out loud. He was not a man who called to share. He was not a man who asked for help unless there were no other options. So my spine went straight, my hands stilling in the dishwater. "Okay," I said softly. "Tell me." "I'm dating someone," he said. And for a moment I felt the old, ridiculous flare of possessiveness, an ancient instinct I thought divorce papers were supposed to cure. Then he added, "It's a man." There's a version of this story where I say I reacted perfectly, where I immediately spoke like a poster in a therapist's office and my heart didn't jump at all. But I'm not going to tell that version. I'm going to tell you the truth. The truth is, my mind went white for a split second, like a camera flash. My stomach dropped and then rebounded. I gripped the edge of the sink like the counter might tilt. A man. I had known Mitch for nearly 20 years, had lived in the same house with him, had seen him sick, angry, tender, bored, goofy, stubborn, and raw. We had made a child together. We had fought about money and chores, and whose turn it was to call the plumber. We had sat on opposite ends of a couch while grief hung between us like fog. We had once been the kind of couple people described as solid, and this felt like a door in the wall I hadn't known was there. The only time Mitch had ever mentioned men was one night early in our marriage, when we were both a little tipsy and our friends had gone home and the apartment was quiet and warm with leftover laughter. He'd said, almost offhand, that he'd experimented in college a bit, and when I'd asked him what that meant, he'd told me about a guy named Andrew he'd only known for a semester. He'd said Andrew made him feel safe and comfortable. He'd said they'd been intimate a few times, that it had been fine, but he hadn't had feelings. Then he'd shrugged and said it was over, like mentioning an old haircut. I remember not knowing what to do with it back then. I'd felt curious and oddly tender and a little threatened all at once. But Mitch had sounded so final, so done, and I'd been young enough to accept done as a fact. So when he said he was dating a man now, my first thought, my very human, very selfish first thought was, how long have you been carrying this alone? My second thought was our child. My third thought was Mitch's face the last time I'd seen him, tight around the eyes like he was trying to hold a dam in place with his jaw. "Mitch," I said carefully, because I could hear the tremor in him, and I didn't want my surprise to turn into his shame. "Okay." He exhaled so hard it sounded like he'd been holding his breath since 1999. "Okay?" he repeated, like he didn't trust the word. "Okay," I said again, and I meant it. Not okay, like it didn't matter. Okay, like I'm here. I'm not leaving the room. You're not alone in this sentence. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then his voice cracked, just slightly, on my name. Brenda. I closed my eyes. The way he said it was familiar, like the last sliver of our marriage that still belonged to both of us, the part that knew how to ask. Tell me, I said. Start wherever you need to start. So he did, in halting, careful pieces. He'd met someone named Eric. They'd been talking for months, first friendly, then more, then the kind of more that sneaks up on you and suddenly you're standing in the grocery store, looking at peaches and thinking about another person's hands. I didn't mean for it to happen, Mitch said, like attraction was a pothole he'd hit by accident. Okay, I said again, because I was trying not to let him frame his own happiness as a mistake. I haven't told anyone, he admitted. Not even my brother, not even... He stopped, swallowed. I'm telling you because of our kid. There it was, the real fear, the one underneath every word. I don't want to mess this up, he said. I don't want people thinking I'm, confused, reckless, a bad dad. My heart squeezed painfully, because that fear, being judged as a bad parent, was the kind of fear that makes people do wild, small, destructive things. The kind of fear that keeps you lonely on purpose. The kind that makes you lie to your own life. Mitch, I said, leaning my hip against the counter like I could anchor myself to something solid. Dating a man doesn't make you a bad dad. I know, he said quickly, too quickly, as if he didn't know at all. I know that logically, but you're scared, I finished. He let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Yeah, he said, I'm scared. I watched our kid in the hallway, head bent over a sheet of paper, tongue peeking out with concentration. Childhood is so purely itself. It doesn't know it's supposed to be a battleground for adult fears. What do you need from me? I asked Mitch. There was another pause. I need you not to hate me, he said quietly. I need you to tell me I'm not ruining their life. I felt the old resentment flicker somewhere deep. Resentment at all the times he hadn't told me what he needed. Resentment at all the ways our marriage had died from unspoken things. Then I felt something softer move in around it, something almost maternal. Protectiveness. I don't hate you, I said. I'm surprised. But I don't hate you. And you're not ruining anything. He breathed again, and I could hear the sound of a man trying to unclench a fist he'd kept closed for decades. Who is he? I asked, gentle. Eric, Mitch said. He hesitated, and in that hesitation, I heard the vulnerability of someone describing joy out loud for the first time. He's kind, he's patient, he's different than what I expected, I guess. Different than what you expected from men, I thought. Different than what you expected from yourself. How long have you been seeing him? I asked. Officially? Mitch said. Like a month. Unofficially longer. I stared at the wet lunch container in my hands. There was a pinch in my chest I couldn't quite name. It wasn't jealousy exactly. It was something like grief for the version of us that might have been if Mitch had known himself earlier, if we'd had language, if we'd been brave at the same time. It hit me then, sharp, unexpected, that I would have been so happy to know. Not because it would have saved our marriage necessarily, but because it would have made parts of Mitch make sense. The way he'd always held himself like he was trying to pass a test no one else could see. The way he sometimes flinched from softness, like tenderness was suspicious. The way intimacy between us had sometimes felt like he was playing a role he'd rehearsed. I wish, I said before I could stop myself, and then I hesitated. Mitch didn't speak, but I could feel him waiting. I wish you'd felt like you could tell me back then, I finished. His voice went quiet. I didn't even know what I would be telling you, he said. I thought it was college, a phase, and then he exhaled. And then I married you, and we had a kid. And that felt like proof. Like, see? Not that. I let that sit, because I didn't want him to feel guilty for the shape his life had taken. I just wanted him to be honest now. "What are you most afraid of?" I asked him. He didn't answer immediately. Then, "That our kid will find out and be embarrassed," he said. "That they'll get bullied. That their friends' parents will, I don't know, decide I'm dangerous or weird or," his voice pitched upward, "that you'll think I lied to you." "I don't think you lied," I said. "I think you were surviving with the information you had." He made a small sound, like he wanted to believe me and couldn't quite reach it. "Have you told Eric about your fears?" I asked. "Some," Mitch said. "He says we can go as slow as I need. But I don't want to make him feel like a secret." I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "That's fair. He deserves tenderness, too." "Yeah," Mitch whispered. A thought clicked into place. Practical. Immediate. "Do you have someone to talk to?" I asked. "Like a therapist?" He scoffed softly. "I tried looking. Half the people in this town have bios that sound like they'll recommend praying it away." My jaw tightened. The quiet cruelty of that. How many people get stuck because the only help nearby feels like a trap? "Okay," I said, my voice turning brisk with purpose. "Leave it with me." "What?" Mitch asked. "I'm going to find you someone," I said, "a queer-friendly therapist, someone who won't make you feel like a problem, someone who understands co-parenting and identity stuff, someone who won't treat you like an experiment." "Brenda," Mitch said, and my name was full of disbelief. "You don't have to—" "Yes, I do," I cut in, surprising myself with the fierceness. "Because you're still my family, we're still a team, and because I refuse to let you stumble around alone in the dark over something that should be allowed to be normal." There was a long silence on the line. Then Mitch's voice went small. "Thank you," he said. "I don't deserve that." "That's not how this works," I told him. "You don't earn basic kindness by suffering enough." After we hung up, I stood at the sink for a while, water running, heart thudding like I'd sprinted upstairs. The surprise was still there, yes, but underneath it, something else was blooming. Something complicated and uninvited. I'll tell you the part I didn't say to Mitch. The part I didn't even say to myself for a few days, because it felt too strange to admit. The idea of him with a man turned me on, not in a cheap way, not like a punchline, more like something in me lit up at the thought of Mitch letting go, at the thought of him being touched in a way that wasn't about proving anything. It was the weirdest combination, protectiveness and curiosity, and an ache I couldn't neatly file away. I felt guilty about it for a second, because we were divorced, because his vulnerability wasn't a toy. But then I realized it wasn't about taking anything from him. It was about seeing him more fully, about imagining him softer than I'd ever been allowed to see. And there was grief braided into it, too. Grief for all the ways we both had lived inside scripts. I did what I'd promised. I opened my laptop that night after our kid was asleep, the house quiet except for the dishwasher's low slosh. I searched, I read reviews, I checked credentials. I looked for therapists who explicitly stated they were LGBTQIA+ affirming, who had experience with late-in-life coming out, with co-parenting, with anxiety, with shame. I emailed 3. 2 never responded, 1 did within an hour. Her name was Dr. Salazar. She had a plain website with calm colors and words that didn't feel like a trap. She talked about identity with respect, about family with nuance, about courage without turning it into a performance. I forwarded the info to Mitch with a simple message. "This one looks solid. No judgment vibes. If you want, I'll help with scheduling." He texted back, You're a lifesaver. And that was the beginning of the strange new version of us. We started talking more, not about logistics only, but about feelings, carefully, awkwardly, like learning a new language in middle age. Mitch told me he'd seen Dr. Salazar once and had left the session exhausted but lighter. He told me he'd cried in his car afterward and hated himself for it until Dr. Salazar had called crying a nervous system release, which sounded clinical enough that Mitch could accept it. I listened without trying to fix. It wasn't my job to be his therapist, but I could be his co-parent. I could be his witness. And slowly, the details of Eric came into view. Not private details, not anything that belonged behind their bedroom door, but the shape of him. Eric had a laugh Mitch found grounding. Eric liked to cook. Eric sent Mitch memes at odd hours. Eric had his own scars. Eric wasn't trying to rush Mitch, wasn't trying to claim him like a trophy. One afternoon, after a particularly messy pickup where our kid had melted down because the wrong socks were in the backpack, Mitch and I ended up standing on my porch together, watching our child stomp inside. Mitch stared at his hands. I still haven't told them, he said, about Eric. I leaned against the doorframe. Okay, I said. How do you feel about that? He shrugged helplessly. I don't know. Like I'm lying. You're not lying, I said. You're pacing. He looked up. His eyes were tired in that familiar way. What if they think I'm gross? My throat tightened. They won't, I said, more certain than I felt. But also, if you present it like it's shameful, they'll learn shame from you. If you present it like it's normal because it is, they'll take their cues from that. He swallowed. I keep thinking about other parents, he admitted. What they'll say at school, what they'll say at birthday parties. Let them talk, I said, and I surprised myself with how sharp my voice got. If anyone makes our kid feel bad about it, that's not a reflection of you. That's a reflection of them, and I will go to war. He blinked at me, a flicker of humor crossing his face. You would? I would, I said. I'm divorced, not dead. That made him laugh, small, real. And in that moment, I felt the quiet heroism of the thing we were doing. Not the grand, Instagrammable kind of heroism, the kind that looks like showing up with the right backpack and the right snack and the right words when shame starts knocking. Weeks passed. Mitch kept going to therapy. He started saying sentences like, I'm bisexual out loud, without choking on them. He told his brother. He told one close friend. Each time he braced for impact and then looked stunned when the world didn't collapse. He didn't tell his parents yet. That was a bigger mountain, and he was allowed to climb it in his own time. One evening he texted me, Eric asked about meeting our kid. I stared at the message longer than I expected. My chest did that complicated thing again. Warmth, protectiveness, a flicker of curiosity I didn't ask for. I typed, How did you feel? He replied, Terrified. Also, relieved, like it's inevitable. It was inevitable, I thought, but it didn't have to be traumatic. It could be simple. So I suggested what I would suggest to any co-parent introducing a partner. Low stakes, short duration, something centered around the child's interests rather than adult conversation. Ice cream, a park, a board game, a brief hello, not a formal audition. Mitch responded. Dr. Salazar said something similar. I smiled, despite myself. Therapy was already doing its work. He was learning that support was a structure, not a weakness. A few days later, at pickup, Mitch looked at me like he was about to jump off a diving board. I think I want to do it, he said. This weekend, just an ice cream thing. Eric's okay with keeping it short. I nodded. Okay, I said, and then I added, because this mattered. You're a good dad, Mitch. You're not risking that. You're modeling honesty. His face softened, and for a second the old Mitch, the man I'd married, peeked out from behind the years. "I needed to hear that," he admitted. "I know," I said. That weekend, Mitch texted me afterward. It went, "Okay." I waited, fingers hovering. "Okay, how?" There was a pause then. Our kid asked if Eric likes Minecraft. Eric said yes, and then they argued about the best armor enchantments for 10 minutes. I laughed out loud in my kitchen, alone with my own relief. Mitch followed with, "Eric was nervous. I was more nervous. Our kid mostly cared about sprinkles." "Perfect," I texted back. "That's exactly the level of drama we want." Over the next months, Eric became a gentle presence at the edges of our child's life. Not a replacement parent, not a sudden new authority, just another adult who showed up. Eric came to a soccer game once and clapped too enthusiastically, then looked embarrassed until our kid grinned and did a little extra flourish just to make him clap more. Eric learned the rules of our co-parenting ecosystem. Respect the schedule, don't speak badly about either parent, show up consistently or not at all. And Mitch kept unfolding. There were moments when he stumbled, when shame flared up, when he got quiet, when he over-explained. There were moments when he texted me late at night. "Is it weird that I'm happy?" Like happiness itself was suspicious. I would answer, "It's not weird, it's allowed." Sometimes I caught myself wondering what Mitch and Eric looked like together when no one was watching. Not the explicit details, those weren't mine, but the tenderness, the ease, the softness Mitch had always struggled to access with me. It made my stomach flutter in a way I didn't fully understand. I didn't act on it. I didn't blur boundaries. I didn't turn Mitch's new relationship into my entertainment. But I did let myself admit quietly that part of me found it beautiful in a way that was also inconveniently arousing, like watching a locked door finally open. One afternoon, months into this new reality, Mitch and I sat on the bleachers during practice while our kid ran drills. The air smelled like cut grass and orange slices. Mitch stared at the field and said very softly, "I thought you'd think less of me." I looked at him, really looked at him. "I think more of you," I said, "because you're doing something hard. You're choosing honesty over fear, and you're still showing up. That's the whole job." He swallowed, eyes glassy. You're being really good about this." I huffed a laugh. "Don't get it twisted. I'm not a saint," I said. "I'm just not interested in making this harder than it has to be." He glanced at me, curious. "Were you mad?" he asked. At first, I considered lying. Then I didn't. "I was shocked," I admitted. "And I was sad you didn't feel like you could tell me earlier." He nodded slowly, jaw working. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know," I replied, and then I added, "because this part mattered too. But I'm also glad you're telling the truth now. I'm glad you're not going to spend the rest of your life pretending." He looked back at the field. "Me too," he whispered. A year later, if you saw us from the outside, we'd look like one of those modern co-parenting arrangements people post about like it's a cute trend. The truth was messier and more ordinary. Calendars and carpools, 2 households, a shared love for a kid who didn't care about labels as much as adults do. Mitch eventually told his parents. It wasn't easy. There were tears, there was confusion, there were questions that landed like small cuts, but there was also, eventually, acceptance, or at least the slow construction of it. Therapy helped. Eric helped. Mitch's own spine helped, the one he was finally learning he was allowed to have. The quietest miracle was this. Our kid adjusted the way kids do when adults don't turn something into a disaster. Eric became Dad's friend Eric, and then, naturally, just Eric. Sometimes our child would mention him casually. "Eric makes good grilled cheese," the way they might mention a neighbor or a teacher. There was no drama. There was just life. And me, I learned something about love that surprised me. I learned that divorce doesn't always mean war. Sometimes divorce means you stop trying to be married and start trying to be humane. Sometimes the person you couldn't stay with becomes someone you can finally show up for in a different way. Not as a spouse, but as an ally, as family, as a co-parent who remembers that the real goal is a child who grows up knowing honesty is safer than shame. I also learned that desire is complicated and sometimes inconvenient. I learned I could be protective and curious at the same time. I learned it was possible to mourn what we didn't have and still celebrate what Mitch was building. I learned that the version of Mitch who could love a man openly didn't erase the years we shared. He just illuminated them differently, like turning a picture and seeing new colors. Sometimes Mitch thanks me still in that bewildered way, like he can't believe I didn't make this into a punishment. I always tell him the same thing. I'm not doing this because I'm extraordinary, I say. I'm doing it because you're not a bad dad for being who you are, and our kid deserves a world where softness isn't treated like a threat. That's the part I want to leave you with, the part that matters more than shock, more than gossip, more than the cultural noise that tries to turn bisexuality into a phase or a punchline. A man in his 40s fell in love for the first time in a new direction. He was terrified it would cost him everything that mattered. And the person he expected to judge him, the ex-wife he'd once disappointed, the woman who knew him best, decided to become a safe place instead. Not because I didn't have feelings about it. I did, a whole tangle of them. But because being a safe place is sometimes the bravest, quietest thing you can do for someone you used to love. And because, in the end, our kid doesn't need a perfect father. They need a father who is real, and a mother who will stand between him and the world when the world gets cruel.